Today, these Hermitage palaces, transformed into a museum, stand at the heart of the bustling city of St. Petersburg. Yet in 1700, the entire area was a swampland, a little-used territory of Sweden. In this program, you'll experience the life and times of Peter the Great, the Russian ruler who knew the value of this land and set about capturing it. On it, he built St. Petersburg, providing for his nation a window to the West. These palaces, in the grand tradition of European architecture, were built long after Peter's death, but they remain his brainchild, for it was Peter who dreamed of fashioning Russia in the image of Europe. Within the walls of this museum, you will see the engravings and paintings, the machines and models, goblets and coaches that mark the tense and energetic time of Peter. He tried to redefine the economy, society, and even the art and architecture of a nation. Part of that meant moving its capital to St. Petersburg. Peter required the nobility and merchant class to move here with all of their material wealth, art, and riches. But Russia was still a primitive nation, immersed in the Byzantine traditions of the Russian Orthodox Church. The port brought a new mercantile economy and Western technology. But still, strongly entrenched serfdom remained unchanged from medieval times. Volleys of cannons marked the birthday celebration of the new city. The conquest of the Neva River Delta, on which St. Petersburg is built, was only one campaign of a 21-year war with Sweden, the Northern War, which would last for nearly the entire duration of Peter the Great's reign. By the end of the 17th century, Sweden had grown to be a formidable naval and military power, controlling the Baltic Sea and its coastline and cutting off Russia from foreign trade. Peter, pictured here, struck first in 1700. The Swedes scattered his army and Peter was defeated, but undeterred. He stepped up ongoing construction of the nation's first naval fleet. This is the Predestination, the first ship of the fleet, equipped with 64 cannons. Peter sailed it up the river to St. Petersburg and victory. Peter's fascination with the sea began as a boy. An old English boat was among the things left to Peter by his grandfather. In this ship, he learned to sail and navigate. He would later call it the little grandfather of the Russian Navy. This engraving of the Battle of Granum was created to mark a peace treaty ending the Northern War in 1721. Sweden had given up Russia's Baltic Sea coastline along with several islands, including Granum. By this victory, Russia had replaced Sweden as the preeminent power in the Baltic Sea. The Swedish ships with their high masts stand out in silhouettes. They are surrounded by Russian rowing ships which lured the big boats into shallow water and then attacked and boarded them. This terrible Swedish defeat cost 103 Swedish lives and 82 Russian lives. A peace treaty was signed. This silver ship was presented to Peter in 1707. This decorative miniature doubled as a goblet. Wine would be poured into its hold and drunk out of a cornucopia held by a lion. Images of the sea became popular decorations in Peter's time. His horse-drawn coach bears a resemblance to renditions of Neptune's chariot. Could it be that as Peter rode in this royal coach along the embankment and looked at the river Neva, just one from the Swedes, that he fancied himself riding in Neptune's chariot? Peter would rest his legs on a support shaped like a seashell. The theme of the sea entered into even ordinary creations like this metal wall lamp. Peter collected paintings of seascapes and ships throughout his life. He was born the fourth child by a second marriage of Tsar Alexis I. His father's first wife barred Peter from the court to guard the throne for her three children, Fyodor, Ivan, and Sophia. Peter and his mother lived in a suburb of Moscow, set aside for foreigners who provided technical assistance to the nation. Eventually, Peter would hang the seascapes he loved in this turner's shop, which served not only as the emperor's study, but as a workroom for the men who operated the lathes. Unlike many monarchs of his time, Peter himself took a keen interest in the trades. Denied access to a court education, his tutors were foreign tradesmen who taught him about shipbuilding, sailing, the workings of guns and cannons, stonemasonry, and carpentry. Ironically, the intellectual freedom and Western ideas he found in the foreign quarter provided him with a superior education. This is his walnut bureau. Due to Peter's great height, almost 7 feet, only he could easily reach its upper drawers. Befriended as a young man by foreigners of technical skill, Peter would always be fascinated by the creations of machines. This church chandelier, produced in the turning shop, was worked on by Peter himself. It was never actually hung in the church it was intended for. It remained here, close to the craftsman who created it. Peter's mind possessed the kind of unhurried concentration needed to create the detail of this chandelier. He also had the strength and innovative thinking necessary to transform the loose confederation of medieval serfdoms into a modern power. A portrait of Peter the Great. Andrei Nautov headed the emperor's turner shop. It was he who taught the monarch master turner skills. Here, in the austere atmosphere of the shop, Peter the Great and his turner put their heads together over the drawings and spun wood on the lathes. Nautov was involved in the creation of this lathe. The machine is a copying lathe, which can reproduce existing reliefs on the surface of new wood. Here, you see a sample of industrial design of the 18th century. Nautov also turned his talents to military needs, developing lathes for boring gun barrels, along with new methods for casting cannons. After Peter's death, he created a rapid-fire gun. It was Nautov who proposed to Peter the creation of the Russian Academy of Sciences to advance the technical fields. Nautov also invented this lathe, a copying lathe to work side surfaces. Formerly, a turner had to hold the tool in his hand and turn the workpieces by hand. Nautov's lathe slides on its own, transferring the metal template design automatically. One wonders how the history of the Russian nation might have changed without Peter's interest in the technical skills. These skills went hand in hand with his ambition to conquer new lands. His hands-on supervision of shipbuilding operations for example, resulted in a victorious Russian navy for a nation with little tradition in shipbuilding. His knowledge of machines led to the creation of armaments. This Arch of Triumph, built over the lathe, symbolizes Peter's many victories. Peter came to power not by direct means, but by default, after illness and palace plots eliminated his rivals. When Tsar Alexis I died, Peter's sickly half-brother Fyodor ruled but died too when Peter was 10. As the result of public pressure, Peter, pictured here, was named co-Tsar. A miniature of Peter. This triumphal column is the work of the Italian architect Bartolomeo Rastrelli, who would one day design the Winter Palace. It depicts Peter's military victories. His image as a mature power stands here atop the monument. But in his young years, he was far removed from actual government. He began his rule in name alone at age 10 as co-Tsar to his weak-minded half-brother Ivan. But he was still barred from the court and lived in the foreign quarter. His half-sister Sophia acted as regent, and the government was actually run by a clique headed by Alexei's first wife. Peter might never have come to power if not for a plot to kill him when he was 17. Relief images on these bronze plates tell the story of Peter's early life and times. They are the work of Bartolomeo Rastrelli, the sculptor and architect. This famous engraving of St. Petersburg dates from 1716, 13 years after the founding of the city. But this city likely would never have been built if Peter had not managed to escape the plot against him. He had fled Moscow to a monastery where he was defended by regiments recruited and trained in the foreign quarter. This plot had been engineered by Sophia, his half-sister. After Peter's successful stand, Sophia was forced to enter a convent, and Peter took power. But even then, he left the rule of the nation in other hands. This time, his mother, Natalia Naryshkina, conducted the affairs of state. Peter amused himself in the foreign quarter. There, Peter found many men of talent and energy who would serve him in his later administration. It was in the bars of the foreign quarter, for example, that Peter met a man who would someday help him oversee the construction of St. Petersburg, Alexander Menshikov. Menshikov, who sold pies in the Moscow streets, became a soldier for Peter. Peter made the low-born Menshikov count and governor of what would become St. Petersburg. Menshikov eventually was named prince. His devotion and zeal led him to a position second to Peter himself in the operation of the Russian government. Peter placed the Admiralty or shipbuilding complex at the center of the city. He oversaw every aspect of Admiralty operations and interfered so often that it was said of him that no one dared drive a nail without advising Peter of it. In his military victories, he was never as pleased with the most complete victory of a land army as he was with any slight advantage gained over his enemy by his ships. The original Winter Palace is shown in this engraving. The artist is Alexei Zubov, who also engraved the panorama of St. Petersburg we saw earlier in the program, as well as the engraving of the Battle of Granum. The palace summer garden was built to rival Versailles, Louis XIV's palace outside of Paris. Like Versailles, it follows a regular symmetrical scheme, accented by pavilions and statuary. This ancient Roman statue of Venus was discovered during the excavations in Rome. It was brought to St. Petersburg to be placed in the Summer Garden after a personal appeal by Peter to Pope Clement XI of Italy. Not only had Peter called on foreign architects to design city buildings and gardens on the order of European cities, he was now taking an interest in art of quality that might be found in the courts of Europe. A Russian fascination with European culture and identification with its history had begun. Here is another etching by Zubov, this time of the wedding of Peter the Great to a daughter of Lithuanian peasants. She became Catherine I, whose name later was taken by Catherine the Great. She had been Peter's mistress for a number of years before she married him in 1712. By some accounts, she was once married to a Swedish dragoon who disappeared in the battle the day after the wedding. Some historians claim there was no hall existing in St. Petersburg at the time large enough for a crowd of this size. All kinds of people were said to have gathered at the wedding table: ladies of the court, officers' wives, representatives of the old nobility, barroom favorites and ne'er-do-wells, as well as Peter supporters in the cause of transforming Russia. Catherine came to Russia as a prisoner of the Russian army and was sent to work as a servant of Menshikov, Peter's closest advisor. She was Menshikov's mistress when Peter met her. The same year, the Tsar Peter made her his mistress. Unlike many court marriages, this was an affair of the heart. Her good humor, intelligence, and vitality made her an ideal match for the headstrong Tsar, prone to bouts of temper and illness from overwork. Peter was handsome and strongly built, but as a result of a childhood trauma, he was prone to a violent facial tic and uncontrollable rolling of the eyes. Catherine bore him 11 children, but only 2, Elizabeth, the future monarch, and Anna, survived to maturity. Some believe that the large round table in Zubov's engraving actually was a blown-up version of the Tsar's desk, where he conferred with his cabinet of advisors, many of whom he met as a boy. Here is Peter at the round table in the engraving. The marriage was Peter's second. His first marriage, to Yevdokia Lepukhina, the daughter of a prominent noble family, was arranged by Peter's mother when he was 17. A few years later, he sent her to a convent, the equivalent of divorce. This is Catherine sitting at the ladies' table. When Peter died in 1725, Catherine became empress, and many of Peter's advisors continued their service under her leadership. Responsibility and power rested in the hands of the Russian nobles. Many of them met Peter in his young years and took positions in the government, running the nation while Peter was absent. In the years before the Northern War, Peter often slipped away from Russia to Europe, traveling incognito. Even after he became Tsar, he was absent for more than a year, leaving his mother and some of these advisors in charge of the government. He traveled to Holland and England and studied shipbuilding, qualifying as a shipwright. While abroad, he hired 700 specialists to aid in the development of Russia's shipping, gunnery, mining, and manufacturing. Russia was the largest, but also the weakest nation in Europe. Peter issued numerous edicts. Many of them were incomprehensible and unpopular with the people. Cossack rebellions ensued, and into this unstable situation, Charles XII of Sweden invaded the Ukraine by land. He reached as far as Poltava near the Black Sea. In 1709, the famous Battle of Poltava was fought. Charles had brought to Russia an army of 20,000 men. 10,000 rebellious Cossacks joined him and began to lay siege to the Poltava fort. Peter, along with Menshikov, marched an army of an additional 42,000 Russians to the outskirts of Poltava. Charles attacked them in the dead of night with just 20,000 of his troops. The armies fought in hand-to-hand combat. Charles XII of Sweden himself was wounded, and in the end, the Russians won a decisive victory, sending Swedish troops fleeing. Peter and his troops fought a battle that turned the tide of the Northern War in favor of Russia. This battle also effectively ended any notions of successful peasant rebellions against Peter's edicts. Just as he battled against Sweden in this work of silver, Peter also attacked the very fabric of Russian spiritual and cultural beliefs, which he considered outmoded. The conservative element of Russian society considered Peter the destroyer of all the traditions they held dear. He refused to appoint a new patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church by substituting a state-controlled council, the Holy Synod. Peter, pictured here in the Battle of Poltava, gained control of the Church's considerable resources for his war efforts. In the year Europe knew as 1700, he forced Russians to replace their Julian calendar. This calendar marked time from God's creation of Adam and Eve instead of the birth of Christ. At the same time, Peter ordered that nobles would have to shave off their long beards and wear Western-style dress. The wearing of beards was an Orthodox custom which encouraged men to wear beards because God had a beard. Peter also transformed the Russian court to his tastes, replacing Byzantine court ritual with concerts, dances, and theater. He ordered that nobles subject themselves to compulsory education. A noble could not marry without a signed document that proved he could read. Peter's aim was to create an educated upper class from which the government and the military could draw. Here, in this bone-carved statuette, the emperor, as Peter was called after his victory in the Northern War, tramples the Swedish lion. The fact that Peter is so often depicted on horseback is a reference to his status as a victorious military leader. In art, the equestrian portrait of a great leader dates back to Roman times. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius was depicted in an equestrian statue that formed the center of the Campidoglio in Rome. In this engraving, Peter is being crowned Emperor of all Russias. This is a sculptural portrait of Peter by Rastrelli. Peter's greatness was not only in battle, but in reforming Russian society. He was impressed with the knowledge and abilities of commoners. He introduced a new system for ranking nobility. Commoners who achieved high position in government or in the military could now attain noble status. Peter's aim was to promote the nation to the dignity of a great power, and this he achieved in his lifetime. His edicts, his reorganization of the government, and his high taxes on an impoverished population made him a controversial figure. But this